All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Tuesday, April 9th study session. I will have our city clerk start with our roll call.
Mayor Kaylee Clark.
Here.
Mayor Karen Howe. Deputy Mayor Karen Howe.
I knew what you meant.
Councilmember Amy Lamb.
Here.
Councilmember Pamela Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kent Treen.
Present.
Councilmember Sid Gupta.
Here.
Councilmember Roisin O'Farrell.
Here.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Lamb, can you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Thank you. Deputy Mayor Howe, the land acknowledgement, please.
We acknowledge that we are on the indigenous land of the Coast Salish peoples who have reserved treaty rights to this land, specifically the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial.
Great, thank you. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Oh, second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, so first up, we have our presentation for streamlining the admin regulations in response to Senate Bill 5290. So we have David and Avril.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. As Avril loads the presentation, I'll go ahead and introduce the topic. New this year to the city's workload was a recent passage by the legislature, SB 5290, that requires that cities review and address some of the potential hangups and work stoppages as part of permit processing. So the points of I guess, it's the right way to put this, the point of review where it slows down permit processing and ultimately causes projects to take longer. The legislature recognized that the expense that extended permit timelines bring to development, uncertainty that it brings to development, causes for an increase in the cost of housing. So all cities are tasked with shortening their timelines and trying to identify unnecessary points in the process in order to help facilitate a shorter and more predictable permit timeline and ultimately permit review process. We've done some review on this and we have some ideas we'd like to present to you, and hopefully we can find a way to help our developer friends be successful and also be compliant with state law. Over the years, one of the things that the legislature observed and that the cities working on this project, supporting the legislature observed, was that things cumulatively were added on top of each other, and ultimately that led to a much more protracted permit process and more complicated permit process than it probably needs to be. So one of the things we're doing is looking at what we absolutely have to keep versus what we have as optional or as a enhancement to our process.
Good evening. I am not the most astute when it comes to PowerPoint presentations. Thank you. Hello, I'm Avril Beatty. I'm the current Planning and Permit Center Manager here at the City of Sammamish. And as David had mentioned, we have some cleanup that we would like to do so that we are more streamlined and will be setting ourselves up for success with 5290 going into effect next year. Exciting stuff. So the purpose of this is to talk about our administrative section of our Title 21 in our municipal code. So as David mentioned, 5290 made some changes that included, so these are of importance to me because this is my day-to-day life. May not be as important to you. You can kind of glaze over this if you want to. So this is regards to how quickly we have to review applications. So when 5290 first came out, everybody kind of freaked out a little bit because we thought it was everything. But in looking at the regulations and how the legislation was passed, building permits were not included in these. It was struck from the definition of project permit. Massive sigh of relief from the collective. So now we're just looking at land use applications being under this category of project permit. And my internet connection is unstable. Hang in there, internet connection. Okay, so there's other allowances that the city can adopt to also to have exempt boundary line adjustments, other like sort of site work permits. So categories, it's broken down by days, but things that don't require a public hearing, so they're at administrative review, things that do require public notice, things like preliminary short plats or conditional use permits, and then things that require hearings. Most of our hearings are for shoreline applications. If you don't meet your timelines, there's a formula for refunding fees. No one wants to do that. And additionally, there's a requirement for full reporting out all counties and cities to the state. They'll put together a big thing and then have it posted somewhere for us all to admire and enjoy looking at.
So I think in addition to this, there's one way to think about this is there are things that we do as part of our permit process for all applications, right? On the front end and on the tail end, there are things that are very similar. However, as you go through the range of different types of applications that we have, and I think we have a dozen or so different permit tracks, whether it's a small scale clearing and grading construction permit to move some dirt, build a retaining wall, or whether it's building a new single family home or doing an addition, dividing land into small numbers of lots, dividing land into large numbers of lots, building a multifamily building, building a large development in town center. There's a range of different application types. And with every one of the steps up that you take in terms of the scale and complexity, there's more to do with regard to permitting. There are more layers. But that's what we're going to talk about here in a minute is the general process that you follow. So remember that there are multiple iterations to this permit process. One of the things we heard from the city manager earlier this week was that it would be great if we could provide a roadmap to permitting. So Avril's done that here. And remember that this is a simplification. There are many different variations to this, and we'd be happy to answer questions about the process. We do this all day. So we don't want to take for granted that we know this in and out because it's quite complex and can be confusing. And we want to make sure we're answering any questions you might have about the permit process.
So generally, the two categories of applications that we have are the land use planning applications versus our building applications. And building will cover all what we refer to as subtrades: electrical, mechanical, clearing, grading, retaining walls, all that fun stuff. So those are for actual, you may go out and construct something versus an entitlement where we'll allow you, we still have to do a construction sort of like life safety code check review. So this is our land use application process. Any questions about this?
Walk through the steps on it, or do you want me to?
Do you want more details on this process? I know your time is valuable. We're happy to do so. Okay, I see some nods. Excellent. So up at the top left, we have do your research. There's a lot there. We have a lot of information online. We provide free project guidance where we give initial information to applicants. Because a lot of times we have people call in, email, stop by, peruse our website, and then we get questions of, well, how do I do whatever it is? And so all of our staff from front desk, permit techs, planners, David, all of us tell people, please submit for project guidance. That's the first way to get documented what you want so we can give you applicable regulations, links to the applications, links to guides, links to information brochures. And it's a lot. And so we anticipate follow-up questions every single time. And so that's the initial step where we first interact with someone who wants to do something, anything from rebuilding a deck to building something new at Town Center. They all get funneled through project guidance. So once someone has received their information back, then we give them the option, because project guidance is free, so we spend a limited amount of time on it so that we can be cost recovery, but it gets the ball rolling. So then we provide the option of pre-development services, and that's where someone can pay for several hours of staff time by both planning and public works. And we also reach out to our cohorts at the water and sewer districts, or to Eastside Fire and Rescue, the schools. Anyone else? I think that's it. And then if someone says, I would like to just talk about what I can do with this property, and then we can give them more sort of tailored feedback on what the regulations are, what obstacles they might encounter, the types of reports that they might need. Is there a wetland there? Is there geological hazards? All that fun stuff. So we hash out a lot with that pre-development services. So once someone gets through that, hopefully they have an idea of what they actually want to do. And if it's anything more than a single-family home, or if there's a critical area on the project site, they're required to do a pre-application conference, and that's when someone is about 75% done with the preparation of their application materials, and then we can make sure, did you get your critical area report? Do you actually have a plan set? Do you know what your scope of work is actually going to be? And so then we can hone in to make sure that they actually submit to us a proper application. So with land use applications specifically, before they're able to submit their application to us, they must host a neighborhood meeting when it's required for, I believe it's conditional use permits and the preliminary short plats and preliminary plats. Maybe binding site plans. Don't quote me on that. But it's in the code. So someone hosts a neighborhood meeting at a reasonable time. So if someone says, I'm going to do it at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, we say, no, don't. Have it at the time that people can actually attend. So once they host their neighborhood meeting, they're supposed to take the feedback that they receive from the community, incorporate it into the final development of their plans, and then they submit to us online. And what's great about the online service that we have with mybuildingpermit.com is it's a really good stopgap. You provide us all the things, we make sure you have all the things. So we do a screening. There's a lot of questions about what happens when we screen applications. We have lists of submittal requirements for all of our scopes of work. So we make sure that all the things are what they say they are, and it's not just pictures of puppies. We enjoy the pictures of puppies, but it's not the technical information report that you need to have. It's not your legal description. So we make sure it is what it says it is. We don't do a qualitative review of whatever it is. So if something is submitted to us, it says legal description, and it looks like a legal description, great. If it's for the wrong property, we're not going to know that when we're screening. We're not doing that level of scrutiny. So as long as it looks like it is what it should be, then we'll accept it. So once applications are received and we've made sure they have all the things, then we accept it, and it's all through mybuildingpermit.com, so there's an audit trail of everything. So once it's accepted, our techs then invoice the applicant for the initial review fees. And it could include review fees by planning, by public works, by building, by fire. Sandplot does not have any fees through us that we have to deal with. And it's to get it in so we can start looking at it, because we are cost recovery. Once the fees are paid, they're paid online. We get a receipt notification. Then it gets routed for review. Depending on the type of project that it is, we immediately set it up for making sure the application is complete, making sure it's the legal description for the correct property, making sure the critical area report is for a wetland instead of for something else that may not be on the property. Things happen. So once we know we have everything, assuming we have everything, we do a notice of application, and that's that initial notice that goes out to the neighborhood. So there's a 1,000-foot radius of noticing that occurs. There's an on-site sign, a minimum of one on-site sign that happens at the site, as well as getting posted on the city's website. In addition to the 1,000-foot radius, if a property is located within the erosion hazard or sensitive water bodies overlay, they additionally have to do a 2,000-foot wide, I'm gonna smack David in the face, 2,000-foot wide column going down to the water for additional noticing. And it doesn't matter what the size of the project is if it requires noticing. It's this whole entire area. Way more than anybody else. So we do the noticing. We have our 21-day comment period, and applicants, neighbors, anyone who has received notice or has found out about it, saw the sign, sends in their comments to staff. Staff receives all the comments. Once the comment period closes, the comments are given to the applicant for them to address, along with all the corrections that the staff has put together as part of their review to make sure everything is in conformance with all of our development regulations. It could be something from, as a density calculation, are your critical area boundaries in the right place? Do you have proper frontage access requirements? Are you designing properly for your street improvements? Are you designing properly for your stormwater improvements? It's all the things. Did you want to add anything? Okay, cool. So then we do this whole back and forth, and this is like the meat of it. Back and forth, we issue corrections, they provide us updated plans, and we do this dance until it's all in compliance. And then once it's in compliance, and assuming there's no public hearing, we can then issue a decision. Then there's another round of noticing that occurs, the same mailing, the on-site sign is updated, and it gets posted on the city website, and then there's an appeal. Parties of record, any interested parties also get noticed. We also have like an agency email list that gets an email blast, so everybody else knows about it also. And then there's an appeal period. If we receive an appeal, then it goes through the process of getting forwarded to the hearings examiner. He has a whole thing in his rules of procedures for dealing with appeals. And then we go through all of that if needed. But generally, there's not very many appeals. So once the appeal period is over, then someone is allowed to submit whatever is a subsequent application, whether it be, if it's a conditional use permit for a church, they can then submit their building permit applications for review to whatever the entitlement allowed. If it was for a preliminary short plat, maybe they're submitting to us a site development permit for the site work and the site improvements that have to be done for the infrastructure and road work and all that for a subdivision development. So that's the rough gist of our land use application. Do you have any questions?
Councilmember Lamb?
Who hosts the neighborhood meeting? Is it hosted by the city or the applicant?
The applicant is required for hosting. So they have to find a venue, they facilitate it, they present what they're considering so far. They provide materials to the community members who attend.
And the city does not attend or participate in
Oh,
that.
okay. And so they get the information as to who the households are that get the mailer, the 1,000 feet?
Tax records.
Okay, all right. I only asked because I got a mailer from somebody that was planning on building an ADU, and we were so far away. I was surprised that I actually got noticed. I was like at the fringe of that when they draw us like a circle, and the ADU was right in the middle. We were on the very edge, but we still got a notice. But I would say, though, that the notice we got was very confusing. I don't know if the city actually has a template for people to send out, but that would be really helpful, because I had a really hard time finding where I lived on the map and where the ADU was, and they actually like struck out the property. So
If you have the opportunity to send that to us.
actually don't, wasn't relevant for me, so I actually threw it
Okay,
out,
yeah.
unfortunately.
If you see things like that, we really appreciate feedback on how well we're doing, and whether something's reported to you with Coffee with Council or something, and you hear about it. If you want to let us know through Scott or directly email myself or Avril, we'd be more than happy to follow up on that and make sure we're aware of some of the, quality control is important. So we don't always get it right. We try. And when we don't, we really want to know so that we're able to make sure to make that correction.
Yeah, so maybe it's just like having a standard template that they use and having a standard map.
We do have a standard template that they use on the website that they're required to use, and they are required to send it to me as well as the permit center as part of their when they do the mailing for the neighborhood meeting. So we do add that to the record. It's not perfect, right? When you have an applicant do something, and especially if it's more of like a mom or pop, not a professional developer, and we've been seeing more and more property owners themselves taking on the development of property as opposed to a professional developer or people hiring a consultant to do the work for them, because people are here in this community are very, very well educated, very smart. They can figure things out, but sometimes development is a little tricky until you get the ins and outs of how it works. So we're trying to help our citizens with tools to make sure they can do it themselves. And sometimes there's misfires, so.
Yeah, I mean, it was for an ADU, so I suspect that the person sending it was probably like the homeowner or something. Okay, thanks.
Deputy Mayor Howe?
So once I've made my comments, does anybody have to follow them? So as the neighbor, I've made my comments. I hate this thing. Don't build it.
The applicant is required to provide a summary of comments along with the notice of the meeting as part of their development application submittal. There from time to time are comments along those lines, and we work with the applicant to make sure that the project is in compliance with the codes, but there's nothing in our code saying that we are required to deny an application because the neighborhood doesn't like it. That's not one of the criteria for review. So we do what we do within the parameters of the ordinances that are adopted.
And we do make ourselves available, and our staff are available to meet with neighbors and to help try to explain what our codes do say. And I have to say that after having met with several neighbors, we're not always successful, but they do walk away understanding.
Right.
Generally, they may not agree, but they do understand what the code says. And I have driven community members towards opportunities to change codes. They could file a docket request if they want to change a code. It's not going to change it for that project, but it might change it in the future. And we have had several successful code changes over the years. Some examples down in Inglewood and Tamarack, other parts of the city where there were some problems that were repeating themselves over and over again, and we were able to change our code requirements. And now the challenge there is that it can become more restrictive, and then it becomes a protracted process, and then we end up with things like SB 5290, where we have to try to figure out a way to shorten the process. So we're trying to find the balance.
Thank you, that helps. I was also trying to understand too, like if I'm coming in to file for a permit, do I make an appointment to come in? Do I just show up at the front desk?
All of our applications are submitted online. Through MBP.
Okay.
MyBuildingPermit.com.
If I were to try to come in, you would funnel me back to going online,
Right,
correct?
right. And we have residents who have trouble with navigating MyBuildingPermit.com sometimes. And so our permit techs have been really good about sitting with people in the lobby to help them figure out getting their stuff logged in. So we do provide technical support where we can, because we know it can be challenging sometimes.
In a perfect world, and I'm not asking you guys to solve this, in a perfect world, when we see those white signs go up, I would love it if there was a visual that went with it that gave us an idea of what to expect. Because I wonder if the comments would improve, and I wonder if the neighborhood understanding would be such that they'd understand what was coming in, because you can't see the sign when you're driving past. You'd actually have to stop, get out of your car, look at it, find it on a map, and then look up the project, and then have a remote idea what this might be about. And I wondered if it would make it easier for people to understand what was coming if they actually had a visual of it. So that's a comment, not something that I'm expecting people to do.
Hold that comment.
We would probably have to change the code to require as a submittal item a rendering of the project, because we can't ask an applicant for something that's not required by our code. And right now we do not have, except for in the town center where we ask for visual renderings, outside of the town center, we do not have a requirement. Say someone was building a new single family home or a subdivision, a rendering of what that might look like. That doesn't mean we couldn't experiment with how to change the code to get that, and maybe there's a QR code you could put on the sign that would then take you to a visual pamphlet, and it might actually help builders. But some builders, they're not interested in doing more because they know they have a right to build it, and they will simply follow the minimum of our process, which is a whole nother part of this story that we'll tell here eventually.
All right, I don't see anything else.
So this other flowchart, this is a majority of our applications. A vast chunk of our work is reviewing of building permit applications for construction. So this is where there's no public hearing, there's no public noticing, and these are reviewed ministerially for conformance with development standards and building codes and public works standards. So this is all through MBP. And so with 5290 coming in, where we have to do a very efficient review and turnaround, we understood that we needed to front load as much as possible. Basically, okay, so I love food analogies. We need to have the best mise en place possible. In a commercial kitchen, the cooks doing all the things really fast, they have all of their ingredients and tools and everything in very specific locations so they can fly through whatever food they need to prepare then and there. And mise en place is put in place. You need to make sure all your things are put in place so you don't end up with a big mess in your kitchen. So we are trying to have as much of our stuff in place for the applicants and for us to be able to show them and have it front-loaded and organized and robust, so that way when an application does come in, it's very thoughtful. It's considered all of the things, and people aren't surprised. We want to get to a place where none of our applicants are surprised by any of our comments. It's a lofty goal, may never happen, but it's a good one to strive for. So in order to sort of approach this with fresh eyes, we worked with the state auditor's office, has a lien services group where for free, they come to cities and they will help you audit or review a process where we did a week-long, this is the front loading I was referring to. We did a week-long workshop with one of their lien service specialists with staff from the permit center, from planning, from public works, from town center, and they looked at what are all the things that happen to get an application in the door. So this isn't even review. This is up to that. So we talked about website improvements we can make. We talked about information brochures that we can make more easily accessible, changing things to plain English, spelling things out better. So we came out with a huge laundry list of improvements that we can make in these amazing color-coded Post-its, which made my heart happy.
So the one challenge here, and there's a book for local government improvement called We Don't Make Widgets, really fascinating read. And there's a chapter on it called The Permit Mill. And the opening statement to that is that the permit mill in local government is the most cursed place to be. And they go on to talk about that being because it is a product that people are required to buy that nobody wants. So because of that, you're left with an applicant that wants to make minimal investment doesn't want to have to go through a process, yet we have to find a way to guide them. So you might hear at Coffee with Council, or you might hear from applicants that the city is really, taking too long, or the city is this, or the city is that. And there are times when there is truth to that. We're not perfect. By and large, those are instances where somebody is not wanting to give us the information that we need to proceed to the next step. And we ask for it, and they just give us the same thing back again. We ask for it, they give us the same thing back again. And they're hopeful that they're going to wear us out to the point where we just issue the permit, and maybe the permit doesn't, the building doesn't comply with our code, because complying with the code is expensive. So that is a challenge for us. So what we're trying to do, and 5290 presents a challenge there as well, because it puts a time frame on the number of rinse and repeats we can do before we are obligated to take action. So what we're trying to do here is, before we even accept the application into the system as complete and they pay their permit review fee, that's when the clock starts. So if we have all the information lined up in orderly, in a manner that we need it to be in order for us to quickly do our review and our job, then we can be more successful in offering a comment letter, having them resubmit all within that time frame, and making sure the project is compliant, and issuing a permit and approving it. The alternative is, if they still won't give us what we need, we can deny it. And we all want to be aware that one of the outcomes of 5290 is we're likely to start denying more permits. Denying permits in itself is not a good thing, not a good place to be for anybody, for the city, for the applicant, for the community trying to buy housing. So we're really trying to avoid that. But know that there is a time where we're likely going to be obligated to deny a permit as a result of SB 5290.
And if I may, Council, I think what Avril and David are alluding to is essentially we're trying to build a better applicant on the front end so that they can be more successful through the process and we can meet those deadlines.
One of David's favorite phrases. So the actual item before you tonight, besides this fun little educational session, oh, sorry, my apologies. Any questions about the building permit process? Okay.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, sorry, David, you opened this can of worms. No, so if this does sort of streamline, so we're going to get to a decision faster, which is the goal, I guess, and a permit's denied, does that have an impact on the applicant being able to apply again? Like, is there a time frame they have to wait, or is it really just a signal that says, like, no, we were serious, you need to give us the right information?
I think it's the latter. We're
Okay.
serious. However, most applicants will take that as a challenge and file a legal appeal. So in all instances when I've dealt with either canceling or that's not always canceling, but generally canceling or denying a permit, it's ended up in some sort of legal battle because an applicant doesn't want to believe that their materials were not what were required. And generally speaking, in a different city, we prevailed in showing the court that the applicant did not give us what we needed to issue a permit that was compliant with our code.
So before you this evening, I'm going to be going through just the administrative section of our code. The goal is that because of these turnaround times, because it's Sammamish, we have a lot of complicated regulations. We have a lot of complications from wetlands and streams and steep slopes and other geohazards. It takes a lot of time to do these reviews well. And we are a lean staff, so we have to be as efficient as possible. And so a lot of our administrative code was put in place in 1999 when we incorporated and adopted the county's regulations. So there are some weird things in there that don't really make sense, and they just need to go. So since we've decided to categorize the complexity of each type of change. So the category ones are cleanup of those weird remnants. Category 2 is maybe there could be some discussion or analysis, but it's not actually going to change a general procedure. It's just the way we sort of approach whatever the regulation is. And then category 3s are ones where we want to have full buy-in from Planning Commission and the City Council and the community about how these things should be considered for changing. So to get into it, so in the agenda bill, in Exhibit 1, bear with me, I took each subsection of that chapter and I went into the types of cleanups that would need to occur within each subsection. So we went into this into a bit of detail during the Planning Commission hearing. I don't know if you all got a bucket of popcorn and watched that or not. Super fun. Most of our discussion was about noticing. So in going through this, existing code, there's weird language, just want to clean it up. That's A. In B, there is a weird table that has building permits as a land use action, which does not need to be there. It's not required to be there. And that's an old King County thing. And so we want to take it out because we already have administrative processes in Title 16, which is where our building codes live. And it can be conflicting if we've got administrative procedures in 2 different titles of our code related to building permits. So we want all the building stuff to be together as one big happy family in Title 16. We want to take it out of Title 21. So that's in subsection B. So then in subsection C, we have project guidance and pre-application conferences. There is a requirement for a pre-application conference to be held anytime you have a single-family home with critical areas on the site. So trying to make sure that that is scaled properly and looking at like what actually triggers it, and then have better clarification on when maybe you don't need it. Because why have a homeowner go through that process if there's not a lot of value being added as part of their application? In subsection D, we want to have better language about the reasonableness of time, because we've had people ask about 3 p.m. meetings on afternoons, and so we point to the code, but the code could have stronger language. And then there's a requirement that a neighborhood meeting be held within 120 days prior to the submittal of the application. And we found that a lot of people have had to redo their neighborhood meeting, even though the application didn't change at all, because they were still trying to work through other issues that had come up. And so having the exact same community meeting doesn't seem to be adding any value either. So we just want to extend that period of time. We're not planning any changes to the Unified Zone Development Plan process. That is only happening in Town Center. We're not touching it. Basic cleanup in subsection F under application requirements and permit fees. We want to take out, not just the Title 16 relocation for the building permits, but also there's administrative items related to public works applications. And public works applications, there are some where there's been ordinance requiring public noticing, which is fine. We don't want to change that, but we have another section in our code that talks about public works processes, and to have this separate from those other applications, it then gets things muddied up between the administration of those applications and appeals by DCD versus Public Works. So by rehoming those into the Public Works section seems to make the most sense, would not change the actual process. just cleans it up. Notice of complete application to the applicant. We don't want to change any of that. And then subsection H, notice of application. This is the meat of it. This is where we want to have significant changes to make the timelines more efficient. We do have as exhibits, there's a table in here somewhere.
Let me interrupt for a
Yeah,
second
yeah, yeah.
while you look for that. So some of the changes that Real's talking about are before the clock starts, and some of the changes, and those are designed to help the applicant, to make it easier on the front end, to build a better applicant, get a better application in the door, right? Those are ones that are not necessarily going to help us with the timeline, but they will, because we're going to get a better product, we're going to have a better relationship, it's going to work out better. But the ones we're talking about now are the ones that are after the clock starts. And if you lay out the process from end to end, there are certain things that make it virtually impossible to meet the timelines. So we are now constrained by a shot clock that only gives us a certain number of days to process a permit. So we have a choice. We can either spend our time reviewing the application materials, making sure it's compliant with code, and working to make sure that the product we end up approving or denying is the right product. Now, there are other things that we need to do where we need to make sure the public is aware of what we're doing. We need to make sure the public has an opportunity to comment on things. We need to make sure that we're tracking comments and engaging the community, and that everyone's, has their chance to learn about a project. So the questions that we have here, I think, are a lot about right-sizing that, because the system that we have today, we can't comply with the timeline. If you go back to that slide.
Current regulations are 120 days, but starting January 1st, we're going to have these tiered review periods. These are days that the ball is in the city's court, calendar days that the ball is in the city court. So if an applicant takes 8 months to make corrections, that doesn't count against us.
And the challenge is that once an application is made and the fee is paid, that's when the clock starts. And at that point in time, then we have to queue up all sorts of different process requirements that all are running on different tracks, whether it is a public notice sign, a notice that goes out, mailed out, an email that goes out, a legal ad. There needs to be the right comment periods, the right review of that form, because if we get a confusing form, as Councilmember Lamb pointed out, it can confuse people. So we need to make sure the language is correct. There's quite a bit that goes into queuing all that up. So you're already eating into the time frame. Not to mention, we also need to deem an application complete, right? There's a formal completeness after they pay the fee, where we now formally review it and then have to issue it as complete. So if you start to stack up all of the things that we have to do, we're running out of time really quickly. So what we're here to ask is, we understand there are some things that are really important to the community, and we want to make sure we're right-sizing it. If there are opportunities for us to clean up the regulations and right-size the amount of effort that's going into certain steps in the process where we're being told by the clock, we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of that. We're not here to diminish the amount of information that gets out to the public or to change the opportunities. It's just right-sizing it so that it's not as much of a lead time to ramp it up. Putting out or ordering a sign from a sign company to have them put that out, that requires contractually time for them to do that within the window that we allow under a contract. Changing the sign type to a sign where the city staff could put it out allows us to be more nimble and to get it out and done in a shorter time frame. So there are some things that Avril will walk through here with you, and we're here to ask for feedback on, is there opportunity to change this? And if there isn't, we'll make sure to look at other areas in the process to make up some of that time and still keep the same system of the initial part of the process that we have today, if that makes sense.
Councilmember O'Farrell?
I just had a quick question, guys. How do you, well, not shot clock starts, how do you keep track of the time? How, you know, is there literally like a clock running on your computer, or how do you know
wish.
how close you're getting to 65 days, 100 days, 170 days?
It has to be done manually with each application. Our permitting system is not nearly sophisticated enough to provide us that information. So someone has to look at when did a correction come in, or when did the application come in, when did we get it out? And we have to add it up by hand every single time.
And would the applicant get kind of an update? Hey, you've got 30 days left. You've got 5 days left. Where are you on this?
So the applicant has 90 days to submit corrections to us. We are very friendly. We often allow extensions to that 90 days, as long as they are actively, working on it.
And that 90 days when they're doing their thing, that's not part of your shot
That
clock.
is not part of our shot clock.
Right, that's great.
Chess clock. It's like a chess clock.
Okay, perfect.
yeah.
And then 5290, when does that come into effect?
It goes into effect January 1st.
January 1st. Okay, all right, great, thank you.
So, noticing, deep down in my planner heart, I love public noticing, but I want it to be effective. The mailers that we send out are in an envelope. You got to open it up. You got to read it. It may not be very clear. Little story, in my past life where I used to work, the support staff would fold notices and stuff them in envelopes and send them out. There was like a whole team of people who had to do this, and they got lots of paper cuts. And one of the workers, she saw that a notice was going to be going to one of her family members. So she thought, as a not scientific experiment, she was going to write whatever her family nickname was for the person on the address line. The envelope says public notice. It's from the city. But she thought, oh, this will get them to read it. So she waits about a week after they get mailed out. She contacts her family person. Did you see the notice that you got in the mail? The what now? They didn't even open it, even though they had a very personalized name in the address line. So generally, in the world of planning, we have learned in more recent years, stuffing envelopes with folded pieces of paper does not get anyone, not that it doesn't get anyone's attention, I'm not going to use absolutes here, but there's more effective ways with postcards where you don't have to worry about somebody opening it. It's in their hand. They can't help but see it. Having too much text right now, our code requires a lot of text. It's like a little dissertation that's got to be crammed onto that notice or onto that on-site sign, which is super painful to read when you're driving by. So how can we have a better way of getting the information out there so that it's digestible, get someone's attention? And I don't want to read a notice to see all the nuances of a project. I want a web address. I want a QR code. I want an easy way that I can go to an online site and see all the things at my own leisure. So what we want to do is change what's required to be included on a notice and not require that it be a certain format. Have it so that we have flexibility to try different things. Try a postcard. Can we do it on a 4x6? Do we need to do it on something larger? We don't have any flexibility right now to try something different. So we're hoping to get some feedback on what City Council thinks would help to be effective. So not only on the notice that gets mailed, but on on-site signs, can we not have the dissertation, please? Can we have a URL and a QR code? Anything is ripe for vandalism. We'll try to make sure things get cleaned up. So having both the URL and a QR code in case one gets messed up or whatever, hopefully the other one still works, that would be likely way more effective than what we have now. And then also the noticing radius, the 1,000-foot noticing radius also can cause a lot of potential error. The applicant has to provide us the mailing list, and then the staff looks at it to make sure, are these all the right street names? We're not checking every single one, but it's like, is this the right general area? Because sometimes it's for southeast instead of northeast, and we're like, oh, you messed that up. So having a smaller noticing radius results in a smaller margin of error by the applicant having to provide that to us. But most people respond to us because they see the sign at the site. That seems to be the most effective thing. There's also people who do, they check the legal notices webpage and they see that something's been added. They're like, hey, I was on the website, I saw this, tell me about it, please. So those are where we get the most feedback. So if we can like hone in on making those more effective, we would like to update the code to allow that.
There's also been, we've had some on and off experience with our development map that shows development activity, and we're hopeful to be able to connect our permit database, which currently is not really connectable to a map. We're hopeful to migrate to either a newer version of that or a new version of permit software ultimately over time, and rely more on a map where somebody can go and they can set a pin, set a radius, they can put their address in, set a radius, and then set an email notification or SMS notification or something that if a permit comes in that's within a certain distance of that pin or that address, then they're sent a notification. That's another way. They could also draw, there are these tools out there, just we need to be able to have our permit database connect to something like that. And currently we have a bit of an air gap problem where the database is not, the way it's designed is not really connectable. We've had consultants working on trying to figure it out. It's challenging.
So given our technological challenges, we feel like the changes that are included in the Exhibit 1 analysis would be a good Band-Aid until we can have better technology to make things even more automated and provide even a better source of informing the public of things happening in their neighborhoods.
So in the interest of time, maybe we just finish the slides.
Okay. So one thing that's not in the exhibit, because it's not in this section of code, is that right now final plats are required to be approved by City Council. And they basically, you have to approve it if it's in conformance with the preliminary short plat. So your time is very precious. So in order to free up the agendas of things like that, where, like, again, there's not a lot of value add, why waste your time with us, basically, to modify it so that it can be approved by the director, and this is all allowable within state legislations also.
State law recently changed on this several years back, and many cities have migrated to either having the department director or the hearing examiner approve it. And the challenge there is that the city council is not the hearing authority on a subdivision, so you haven't had the benefit of hearing and seeing all the proceedings, yet at the same time you're tasked with passing a resolution to approve the final plat. It's a little disconnected. So the option would be either to pass it down to the director to ensure that criteria or the conditions have been met, or to pass it to the hearing examiner who could then approve it. And the hearing examiner is the one that did the hearing, so they should be familiar with it. We currently have a system where it's administrative director approval for a short plat, so up to 9 lots. And then the director also does the approval, or designee, usually it's the staff that do the review and ultimately sign it, the final plat, the final short plat drawing for 9 lots, up to 9 lots. So we already do that. It just would be an expansion of that to larger projects. So there's a couple different options there.
So under subsection J, there's very small margins of changes that can be made to applications before it technically triggers a new application, which can be preventative for getting a thoughtful redesign to applications. So we're not saying get rid of it, we're just saying let's loosen it up, let's make it more reasonable, because right now it is very, very small amounts of changes.
There are some things we want to be careful with that, though, where we don't want a bait and switch, right? We would not want an applicant to submit something that shows access from a certain street and has an arrangement of a forested buffer in a certain area, do the neighborhood meeting, do the public notice, do the comment period, go through a review, and then come in and move the access point to a project, move where the green space or the forested buffer is, and a neighbor might think, oh yeah, this is okay, and then they change the project and it's a completely different design and, you know, constitutes what I call a bait and switch, and the neighbors don't know about it. So we want to be mindful that there are some changes that really should be a new application or require a renotice. One thing you could do is that if there are substantial changes, that it requires a renotice and a new comment period. That's something that I think is within your range, although it does add to the clock. So that's another part of that.
So speaking of adding to the clock, not just this agenda item, under subsection M, permit issuance, there's a portion that says, in order for a mutual time extension to occur under the current 120 days, you have to do an additional notice and notice board. There's no value add to that. It doesn't trigger additional comment period. So another on-site sign goes up, another notice goes out, but the neighbors don't get to give additional comments at that point. And it's just another requirement of process that doesn't add any value. So we just want to take that out, but have an administrative, the 5290 regulations do state that the time periods can mutually be agreed to by the applicant and the jurisdiction. So we want to clean up and get rid of the noticing requirement. And then for January 1st, the goal is to have a form that is clearly spelled out explaining the request for an extension that's signed by both the applicant and the city, and then it's in the file, and then we're in compliance, and we don't have to worry about refunding anything. So after this work session, I am hoping to get all of your feedback, and then I will start strike drafting that section of code up, and then going back to Planning Commission for a public hearing, and then coming back to you for a final public hearing. So those are the next steps that we're looking forward to. I don't have anything scheduled yet, but it has to happen before the end of the year. On that note, what other questions do you have?
Councilmember Gupta.
Thank you for the presentation and for the overview of the flow chart for the land use application. I think that was very helpful for me. I saw in our agenda packet that Planning Commission did recommend maintaining the noticing that you'd mentioned for properties downstream within the erosion hazards near sensitive water bodies overlay. Did they recommend maintaining that 2,000 feet corridor down to the water?
The general sentiment was understanding that having a smaller noticing radius was reasonable, but continuing some amount of downhill, downslope notification. So maybe it's a 1,000-foot wide column instead of a 2,000-foot wide column. And that could be a good stop, a good measure for now until we can have better technology in place where someone could get an automatic email notification regardless of where you live.
I think it's especially important when we're dealing with drainage adjustments. So when somebody is proposing an alternative method of drainage in a slope area or in an area that is susceptible to erosion or stormwater, is challenging for stormwater management, I think we want to make sure, and what the commission was talking about was wanting to make sure that somebody downhill of that site is aware that there's an alternative method of managing stormwater proposed. Just, you know, out of precaution, because water flows downhill. We want to make sure people are aware of what's going on up above them.
Thank you. And for the mailed notifications, so the city has a template that applicants are required to use. Is the process that the applicant fills out the template and then sends it to the city, and the city is the one who actually mails out the notices? Is that?
So there's the notice that the applicant is responsible for is the one that happens for the neighborhood meeting. And so that's the template that we send to them, and we hope they use. They don't always. For the notice of application, that is the city's template, and so the city has control over that. The city staff puts it together, sends it out to our consulting firm that does the mailing for us, and if we get some modifications to our on-site signs, we wouldn't need the same on-site sign noticing contract that we have now, where there have been some snags.
Different cities do it differently. The city I live in, you put out basically like an election sign with the two little wire things, right? We're a small city, Lake Forest Park, so not a lot going on there. In Bellevue, they put out signs that are like a real estate sign, and they basically hang it from the pound of green stake into the ground, slip the thing over it, and then zip tie a bigger piece to it. And there are other examples where some cities go bigger. You might find that maybe you want for normal development out in the R zones that a smaller sign is more acceptable, but for something like the town center, a bigger sign is needed. There are different options. The challenge that we have is being nimble. Like we want to be able to order up a sign correction or a new sign to be put out there, and we can't currently do that. And the sign vendor is actually die cutting every single letter that they put on the sign. So it takes quite a while for them to set up those signs and put them out. We've been asking for them to be able to do a vinyl sticker print, like a large sticker, and just stick it on the sign. But the cost then would go up significantly, as those stickers at that size are quite expensive. If you were to make the sign smaller, then the sticker price would go down, and we might be able to achieve that. But the size of the sign is really the barrier that we're dealing with right now, and the cost of managing that. The other challenges are that in order to put a sign of that size in, you have to do utility locates in order to go out there and dig a hole necessary to put the posts in because of the wind effect on the signs. You also have the line of sight issue with intersections. It's a vandalism target. So there are other considerations where you might want to consider a smaller sign. However, again, the sign is one of the main ways people are aware of projects. So there's that part to it too. We're not advocating either way. We're advocating for trying to find the right balance so that we can make sure to streamline our process and not eat days that on the clock that we have available dealing with things like noticing. Not as many days, I should say.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, I'm all for making our policy so that you can be more nimble. I think I think having the noticing signs is important, but I think, being able to make it in a way that even when you stop and read it, it's kind of hard to read. So QR codes, having a really great page on our website where people can find stuff. So all they have to do is see something that's recognizable that says, oh, there might be some new development over there, and then they can find it when they get home, right? I think some of those things and really being able to use technology will lower our costs, lower hopefully the time that you guys spend on it, and actually provide better information to the community. So I'm totally in favor of that. Maybe it's something that's still unique, right? Like I think part of it is those big white signs people have, or blue or whatever they are, have come to recognize them for what they are. There could be some way that we, could be smaller and easier to do, but it could have something that's very recognizable on it still that gets people's attention. So I'm all for whatever you guys think we need to do to be more nimble. Thanks.
Councilmember Lamb?
So I actually did watch the Planning Commission. I didn't have a bucket of popcorn though. I did hear a couple of comments about the being down on the slope of somebody that's above and wanting to be noticed if they were down below. So, I agree with that, and I think it's a good compromise to have it at 1,000 feet. And I think the QR codes are great. I see the signs, and I actually, if I'm walking, I'll stop and I'll read them. And if you want more information, there is no QR code, so I think having that is great. For the plats and approval of the final plats, I don't remember where Planning Commission was on that. And for the last 2 years, have we approved any plats other than anything coming through Town Center?
We haven't. We've had a couple that have popped up on consent, right? And there's that. They do flow through at times, but there are times when maybe they get pulled from consent. But there also is quite a bit of work and lead time that goes into ramping up a city council agenda item weeks, right? Weeks in advance. So it adds time to the project when when an applicant is really trying to get their final plat recorded. They're usually in search of money because they're ready to start to sell lots, and you can't sell lots until you create the legal tax parcels. So usually at that point, an applicant is very desperate. They've put all of their money in the ground in terms of infrastructure, and they're needing to turn that around. And there's usually some clumsiness that goes on with that transition point in a project, because that's where one of their teams is handing off to another team. So at that point, their team that actually builds the stuff is handing it back off to the office again to move the final plat through. So on their end, it's not the smoothest transition either. So anything we can do to really try to streamline that to get the project to closure, because at that point in time, I guess the question I have is, if they've met all the criteria, met all the conditions, what really are we gonna do?
Additionally, David probably remembers what section of the RCW it is. Cities and jurisdictions have 30 days to do a decision on a final short plat application. So that regulation's already been in place, so that's another shot clock that we have to contend with.
Okay, great. I guess I'm comfortable then with the, without city council approval on that.
Councilmember Trine?
Yeah, sorry for the outburst there. There's nothing. I mean, I've been 4 years, 5 years, nothing on the final plat approval by director, here, examiner, fine. We should do that, because by the time it gets to us, it's a rubber stamp. So, I mean, if I could actually change something, that'd be awesome. But that's not going to happen. So, yay. One other thing about notices. I think it'd be really smart to, because I thought I already had this, but I'd like to receive all notices of all permitting that's going on in the city. I guess I'm not so much interested in, if someone's going to build a deck, but yeah, if they're going to put in a dock with a float plane, I'd like to see that one, just because I get curious about who's got the float plane. But so I think if there was a all notices email, that if I'm a resident of and I'm interested in this kind of stuff and I want to be up to date, the number of permits that the city is filing that would fall under that 100 and 170 day, why not just send it out to all residents who are requesting it by email? The other is, I'm not sure about the notification of reducing it to 500 feet. I have a concern there, because if I'm a developer and I have 20 acres and I build in the middle of that 20 acres, I don't have to notify anybody. So if I got 100 acres, I don't have to notify anybody, because my project is within my own property. Who am I notifying? How about I'm notifying myself? Excellent. So it seems to me that that's a concern that I would have, especially with the larger projects. How are we going to find out about that, or how are the residents going to be able to find out about that?
Some cities have a minimum standard that says that it's 500 feet, or you must notify at least 50 properties, for example.
Yeah.
So and you could add stipulation to that under separate ownership, right? And I understand what you're saying is that if you had a large land holding that was an assemblage of multiple parcels, and you were only developing the parcels in the middle, and you had to do the mailing that was 500 feet, and that only happened to notify yourself, point taken.
Thanks. Since a lot of people do live downhill, because we are a plateau, definitely 1,000, but I like 2,000. I wouldn't change that. People can figure that one out. It's not that difficult. So, wouldn't change those. There was one other thing that, and I think it's about 3 slides back, but on the appeal process, I think that's one of the things that is really misunderstood about the process. And in the process, where is there opportunity to make an appeal Because is it after you send the letter that says, hey,
Yeah, so the appeal process happens at the very end. There are two major public notices that go out with a project that requires public noticing. Not all do, right? A building permit doesn't require generally public noticing. But the first step is there is a notice of application and a notice of SEPA optional process, which is where we're following State Environmental Policy Act and we're following the Local Project Review Act, and we're notifying neighbors within whatever our radius is, whether it be 1,000 feet plus 2,000 downhill or 500 feet, or whatever we adopt. That notice goes out, and that's also a notice of comment period. It's usually a notice of availability of materials, notice of application, notice of availability of application materials, and notice of 30-day comment period. 21-day comment period. 21-day comment period, excuse me.
and you're looking to reduce that to 14?
Possibly.
Okay.
With your direction, yeah. So that first notice goes out. Then we collect comment, send it to applicant, as Avril said. Or the applicant responds. We also provide response to fill in the gaps on some of the things that are city process related. Ideally, we get through rounds of review. We get to issue a permit. We issue a notice of decision and a notice of SEPA threshold determination and a notice of appeal. And the appeal period is 21 days. So within that 21 days following, somebody has the ability to file an appeal to the city clerk, to the hearing examiner's office, and that would then result in the hearing examiner taking jurisdiction and reviewing the appeal and holding a public hearing on the appeal and ultimately rendering a decision. And if somebody didn't like the hearing examiner's decision, they could file for reconsideration per the hearing examiner's rules. And if they didn't like this hearing examiner's result of reconsideration, the issuance of decision on reconsideration, then they could file a Land Use Petition Act appeal to Superior Court. And then it goes on. And we've seen some, go up to the Court of Appeals, I think is the next step. I'm not in a legal mind, but we've seen them go from, the city's decision to the hearing examiner's decision to the lower court's decision to the higher court's decision, and these things can stretch on. So there is that appeal route available.
Yeah, I'd stick to the 21 days would be my recommendation.
For the appeal period.
For the appeal period.
To allow somebody to get materials together to submit appeal to the city clerk's office and the hearing examiner's office.
Correct. Thank you.
And at that point, we've made the decision. So
yes,
we're not being, the clock is no longer running.
So to do an appeal, there's no clock running.
Correct.
Yeah. So just allow people the time to make the appeal. Thanks.
Deputy Mayor Howe?
I just have a couple of quick questions. When you were talking about the appeal process, it reminded me actually of insurance appeals, which are multiple languages. Is everything we do in English?
I think everything we do is in English except at the tail end when you get into the appeal process. So there are things that we as a department do not control, such as hearing examiner rules. And I find the hearing examiner rules to be less in plain English than most of our code, which is saying something. We have guides to appeals. There also is a guide that, it's called, trying to remember what it's called. I think it's You Be the Judge is one of the guides, and it helps understand different process, right? Different appeal settings and things like that. So there are public information materials and supporting guides that the city clerk's office has that do help make it in plain language. Because if you read the hearing examiner's rules of procedure, they require an advanced degree to understand.
Which is concerning, and I could see where people could get confused with that. It was interesting with the meeting that we had this afternoon with Mary from the library, who just said the second most popular language is Chinese that she's noticed in terms of the library. So I just wanted to make sure that we did have resources for residents that were able to power through trying to understand what they needed to do for themselves. The other question I had to do with is with the software. You mentioned that you have to do this calculation by hand in terms of tracking things. That is horrifying. So is this software not extensible? Does it not update to accommodate when something like new rulings or regulations come out?
The software that we currently use doesn't have that type of configurability in the version that we're currently using, nor in the next 2 versions that are available.
So you see your future.
Yes.
Yeah.
So part of IT's work plan. Scott, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I can follow up on this one. Thank you. As council may or may not be aware, we are working on an IT strategic plan. Part of that is looking at what do we have, what do we need, and have those 2 met, and if not, what needs to happen to get us there. There's a broader conversation around community developments software that we are, not to deep dive, we are part of a broader system region-wide. That system may or may not require replacing. All of this is sort of stacked within that. So it's an easy question with a very complicated answer, and the answer is, as all things with software, it requires, it's really great until it's not, and then we have to figure out what else to do.
All right, is there anything else from council? Yeah, I think proposed changes look good. I don't really see any concern. It seems like it's going to make everyone happier, I hope. Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't know that there's like that sign near the commons. When things do fall down, I mean, what are you supposed to do?
One of the challenges we have with the vendor is going out and cleaning up old signs. So if you see old signs that should come down, please let us know. We also are trying to do an inventory internally of projects that have closed out and making sure the signs come down. When signs fall down, it would be great to let us know. You can see Click Fix It.
The commons entrance, yeah.
I think I've seen that
kidding.
one.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So we want to make sure, because what's happening is they're installing the signs at a depth where they don't have to do utility locates. And this is one of our challenges with the contract. I'm just being transparent. And when they do that, then the signs fall over. So have been going around and around with them about, you need to install the signs deeper. Well, then they need to actually do utility locates, which takes longer because now you have to get the locate out.
Well, yeah, then I'm definitely for whatever can make that easier. And it is, I think also when people read it, it's like, what's DNS? Like things like that. If they look at like, what is SEPA? So would love that QR code. But yeah, I think that's great. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Item number 2, new national pollutant discharge elimination system with Stephanie, Audrey, and Greg.
And Mayor, if I may, while they are being promoted under the presenter screen, the next 2 items on the agenda are informational and for discussion with council. We're not actually looking for direction. So just prefacing these 2 next ones.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. For the record, I am Audrey Sarcy, the Public Works Director. Joining me this evening is Greg Stamatillo, our Deputy Public Works Director, as well as our Senior Stormwater Program Manager, Stephanie Sullivan. So Stephanie will be presenting the draft 2024 through 2029 NPDES permit, or National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, that is the city's stormwater permit with the Department of Ecology. So Stephanie is here to present a few updates with this next permit cycle. So each stormwater permit cycle is updated about every 5 years. And with those updates usually come more requirements as well as more stringent requirements. So I'm looking forward to providing you more information and the discussion afterwards. Stephanie, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Audrey. Stephanie Sullivan, Senior Stormwater Program Manager. Audrey, if you could share the slides, that would be helpful. Oh, Greg, thank you. Good evening, Council. So I'm happy to share with you tonight about the 2024-2029 National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit reissuance. So these are proposed requirements with the new permit that will be scheduled to be reissued this summer. Go ahead, Greg. So our goals tonight is to give you an introduction to the permit. We'll overview the storm and surface water utility in the program, present some of those proposed permit changes and also review potential impacts to city projects and programs, and then do our best to answer any questions you may have. So the reason we are here tonight is because of our shared values with clean water. So Greg, if you could go the next slide. Thank you. So clean water is important to everyone. Having our healthy lakes and streams, protecting our drinking water and recreational opportunities on Lake Sammamish. So this all stems from the Environmental Protection Act and the Clean Water Act, which was passed in 1972 as federal regulation. So that federal regulation was delegated to the states to implement those requirements. And the different permit types that in Washington State, the Department of Ecology issues includes our municipal permit, as well as industrial permits and construction permits. So any development in Sammamish that meets certain thresholds are also required to get permits with the state directly and do their own reporting. So in the city of Sammamish, we're a phase 2 permittee because we are a smaller jurisdiction. There are larger jurisdictions with greater populations like King County or the city of Seattle. They are considered phase 1 permittees. That's actually a really helpful relationship for us because their permit requirements come first. And so their phase 1 permit gives us a good introduction into what our permit requirements will be. And a specific example of that is that we do adopt the King County Surface Water Design Manual and then a Sammamish addendum specifically for Sammamish needs. So that's an example of that. Next slide. So our stormwater and surface water division is one of 7 in the Public Works Department. We are funded through the 438 fund, which is our capital fund, and the 408, which is the operations fund. And it is an enterprise fund, so we are separate from the general fund with separate revenues and separate expenses. In our 2024 work plan, you'll notice that NPDES permit compliance within our operations fund is just one program of many. It includes our stormwater management action plan, illicit discharge detection and elimination, regional internal coordination, and others. And our NPDES permit compliance is also supported by our many other programs. You'll see those in bold. For example, the 6-year capital improvement plan update, basin planning, dam safety program, water quality monitoring. All of these programs are not specifically required by the permit, but do support our permit compliance efforts and planning. So the draft 2024 to 2029 permit has 9 sections, and the specific red lines of the details of those permit changes are available on the Department of Ecology's website, along with comments that have been submitted by other jurisdictions, environmental groups, and the public that the Department of Ecology takes into account before they issue this permit, which is scheduled for August 1st, 2024. So there are 9 sections being proposed. 8 are existing sections which have some significant changes, which we'll go through next. And one of these sections, section 5.c.7, is for stormwater management for existing development. This is a new section, and it's commonly referred to as having retrofit requirements. And there are other activities that can count towards this requirement, which we'll get into more detail next. So I realize this slide is busy, but we wanted to try and give you as much information as we can. And I will call out a few of these specific areas that have significant changes. And so the first one, in the first column, section 5C1, is our stormwater planning section. And you'll notice the permit is proposing to require establishing tree canopy goals for city-owned or operated properties. We believe the urban forestry management plan that was completed several years ago has laid a lot of the groundwork for the city to meet this requirement and comply with the permit. Our team would work closely with the community, our sustainability coordinator, and community development to implement this requirement, along with support from our IT department for mapping that existing data. And all of that would be heavily based on what was collected through the urban forestry management plan. The next one I'd like to speak to is about Section 5C.2, C.5, and C.8, which are all proposed to be updated to address polychlorinated biphenyls, commonly referred to as PCBs, which is an inorganic toxic compound. It's commonly found in oil-based paints, and the manufacturing of PCBs was outlawed in 1979, but ecology and the EPA have recognized that there's legacy pollution to be addressed in stormwater runoff. So this would require us to update our code to prohibit the discharge of PCBs, provide education to minimize the discharges to our stormwater system, apply best management practices on city-owned facilities that may have PCBs, and also apply to private facilities for commercial, industrial, and multi-story residential structures that were constructed or remodeled between 1950 and 1980. The requirement proposes that an assessment would need to be done prior to washdown of these buildings, and also single-family structures would be exempt. So we do feel that this implementation could be challenging. And one option is to address this as part of our existing source control program, where we attempt to identify and educate about pollution at the source. So this program, last year, we implemented 20 inspections on individual businesses. And this would take some additional specific effort and outreach on PCBs. The next item is Section 5C.6 about controlling runoff from new development, redevelopment, and construction. Specifically, this would require us to update our code and the surface water design manual for addressing road-related detention thresholds. So flow control is the common requirement term. Currently, the requirement necessitates new impervious surface being treated on road-related projects. The proposed requirement would add replaced impervious surface, so it could significantly increase the amount of detention required on transportation projects that the city does in the future. And this would be required by June 30 of 2027. There are some maintenance exemptions that would still be allowed. However, the concern with the costs increasing on transportation projects is that it could reduce the number of projects that we can implement if additional funding is not able to be found. So we could consider this new requirement as part of our next rate study update. And so increasing stormwater fees may be one option to address that upcoming requirement. The last one I'd like to talk to is Section 5C.7, Stormwater Management for Existing Development. We have proactively adopted a retrofit study several years ago, knowing that this requirement was coming. The Stormwater Retrofit Program was adopted and funded through the 2022 rate study, and I expect the city will substantially meet this requirement with our current retrofit program, along with a few other activities that are already in progress, such as street sweeping, maintenance projects. And then other options to address this would include restoration or property acquisition efforts. So I don't currently have concerns about meeting this requirement should it be issued with the new permit. Go ahead to the next slide. So this slide is a visual representation of some of these requirements. And I'd like to specifically call out the current permit cycle on the left. 2019 to 2024 is ending, and the new permit would be issued August 1st, 2024 for 5 years. So that 5-year cycle, you may recognize it is intentional. It allows the Department of Ecology to update requirements to address best available science. And our program has proactively identified many of these requirements and planned for and prepared to meet them. So we don't have too many concerns about the proposed permit, but the transportation construction cost increases that are likely is definitely a challenge, along with the PCBs. And we expect that beginning the stormwater utility plan update in 2025 and 2026 will help us plan for meeting these requirements on a continuing basis, and also incorporate the citywide comprehensive plan policies, these new permit requirements, and also community input on stormwater water priorities. And following that, we would update our rate study, which then incorporating all these new requirements can reevaluate our fees and ensure we're taking in the right amount of money and doing the right efforts. So that's a summary of the overall permit cycle and big items. Do you have any questions?
Councilmember Stewart?
One quick question. Does the Thompson Hill Road stormwater project meet the new S5.C.6 requirement?
I'm not entirely sure. I know they are providing flow control per the current requirements.
It's okay. I didn't expect that you'd be able to answer that off the top of your head. Might be something. It would be great if we could get a follow-up on that. Thanks.
Yeah, we could follow up with the project manager.
It's very quiet over here. Anyone else? Yeah, that was a lot of good information. I don't know what all of it means, but I trust you all do, so that is great. Councilmember Lamb.
So I see that the tree mapping is 4 years out. Why is that 4 years out as opposed to earlier?
So the timeline in the requirements are set by the Department of Ecology. So that's the timeline we're required to meet to implement it.
The follow-up to that, Councilmember, if I may, is that that's not to say that we have to wait that long. That's when the requirement is due. So I think part of this is for the team, once we get a little more into it, when we start doing planning for the next sort of cycle of the stormwater code, that's part of the pieces they'll be looking at, pulling together the work program. What do we need to change to address the updated permits?
Great. I think you knew where I was heading with that.
Councilmember Treen?
Yeah, to follow up with that. So when is the urban forest plan coming back to us? Is that here?
We don't have a specific time frame yet, Councilmember. That's still a work in progress with the Sustainability Commission to look at that. It's on their work program. They've got a lot on their work program. So I think it's a work in progress.
Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, we were going to relook at that within a year's time or within the first 2 years, and then implementation. And part of that implementation could include mapping of our trees. And I think that was actually one of the things that was on the implementation segment of that plan. So the plan's in place, but it's a matter of how we're going to fund implementing the actual action items that need to take place on it. And one of them would be nice if we had an arborist and then we were actually mapping our trees. Thanks.
All right, anyone else on this before they get to move to the next one? And Stephanie, are you dropping off for this one, the next?
Yes, she is.
Okay.
And before you head out, I just want to say thank you to Stephanie and council. So part of the reason why we're able to anticipate these upcoming permit requirements so proactively is that we do operate at that enhanced level of service. So as Stephanie alluded to in her presentation, with that level of service, we are already anticipating retrofit projects, right? So we're able to really jump ahead, if you will, a few years. And so as we look at this upcoming permit, we're very confident we'll be able to meet all of the requirements to comply with the permit and ahead of schedule. So just thank you for the different funding opportunities over the year and as well as funding the utility at the enhanced level of service. It's set us up in a great trajectory for the next upcoming permit.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have this right here, Introduction to Capital Planning, Project Delivery, and Budgeting.
And before Audrey and Greg start, Mayor, if I may, Council will recall last week we did a very high-level citywide CIP, and that we were going to come back with a more specific. So this is the Public Works version of Public Works planning and Public Works projects as part of that educational piece leading into our citywide CIP conversation and then leading into the budget. So with that, Audrey and Greg, please take it away.
Thank you, City Manager. Again, good evening, Mayor and City Council. For the record, Audrey Starcy, Public Works Director. Joining me to present this presentation is Greg Samatiu, our Deputy Public Works Director. We are very excited to build on the presentation that was presented last week on the 2nd and to dive into a little bit more of the details of the capital planning process. So next slide, please. So before we dive into capital planning, we will take a few minutes to go through what our city infrastructure is and how that is built and what a capital project is. We'll go through our programmatic capital planning stages, including how we prioritize our projects and plan to budget and fund those projects. And Greg will take us through an overview of our project cycle once projects gets to a project planning stage, as well as all the way through project closeout and maintenance. So next slide, please. So to start at a high level, we wanted to spend a few minutes talking about what public infrastructure is. So infrastructure is commonly referred to, we'll see a lot of different terminologies, often the same thing. Often we see infrastructure assets or assets, it's all the same thing, but it's infrastructure that is facilities, systems, and structures that support the community and that are owned and operated by the city. So here at Sammamish, that consists of our parks, our facilities, our streets, and all the many components of our street infrastructure and our stormwater system, some of those that we just spoke to in the previous presentation. So in Sammamish, we plan, we build, we maintain, improve, and replace a majority of that infrastructure in the city. The reason why a few words here are underlined, those are a precursor to the next slide, but that those underlined words comprise a capital project. So we'll get to those in a few minutes. Down below, we wanted to highlight some of the infrastructure that the Public Works Department manages. So I won't go through all of these, but there's quite a bit. And primarily our traffic signal systems, our streets and our right-of-way, as well as our stormwater systems. Next slide, please. So this is a life cycle of both our projects and our infrastructure and how we are constantly planning. The intent of this slide, and you'll see this throughout our presentation this evening, is to really highlight how much planning goes into planning for a project, as well as an individual asset or a set of infrastructure assets. There's a lot that goes into it well before construction phase. So you'll see construction here highlighted as the orange wedge. That's often the shortest time that a project cycle or a project is going through a cycle. Obviously, that's the most visible time to the community that a project cycle, or I'm sorry, that the project is going through, but it takes years and years of planning. For this scale, we assumed a 30-year shelf life for an asset. All assets can have a much longer lifespan, but we just picked a 30-year lifespan to portray here the different cycles of that. So I'll be speaking to you tonight about our programmatic planning efforts and our functional planning efforts. Greg will be talking about our design, construction, and our closeout and warranty periods, and then I'll be back to me to talk about some of our maintenance and rehabilitation work as we plan to replace those assets. Next slide, please. So I'd also like to highlight the definition of a capital project. We're often asked this question. And just to be clear, a capital project is often also referred to as a capital improvement project. There's a lot of acronyms in public works. They're all pretty similar, but just wanted to clarify that for the community. A capital project is a construction project. It's major maintenance and improvement projects. So that includes infrastructure upgrades as well as replacing our infrastructure assets. And public work is defined in Washington by RCW 39.04.010.4 as all work, construction, alteration, repair, or improvement other than ordinary maintenance that's executed at the cost of the state or any municipality or which is by law a lien or a charge on a property therein. So essentially, a few slides ago, we talked about what the city does. A public work is responsible for pretty much all of those things, those community assets. Next slide, please. So I also wanted to spend some time highlighting what capital projects are in Sammamish. So starting with the upper left corner of my screen, you'll see the design phase for one of our projects currently in design in our sidewalk program. This is at Southeast 24th Street near Beaver Lake Park. That's going to construction phase this summer. At the top of your screen, you'll see the project and design phase for 4th Street, as well as at the bottom, that actually is a photo of the project completed. On the right-hand side of your screen is the completed eBright Fish Passage project. The right-hand bottom corner is the Issaquah Falls City Road project. That was an award-winning project that was recently completed. And to the left in the middle of your screen, you'll see some ADA remediation work that we were doing, completing last summer near Pine Lake. Next slide, please. So now that we have a capital project defined, we'd like to talk about what a capital plan is. City manager spoke to this a little bit last week in his presentation, but this just recaps some of that description. So a capital plan prioritizes our funding and our projects for 6 years. A long-term capital plan prioritizes projects and funding up to 20 years. Those are also important. We're here tonight mostly to talk about the 6-year planning horizon. Capital plans are extremely important. They improve the trust and transparency in the community. They align with community goals and set service expectations. They mitigate risk and improve public safety, incorporate technology as technology evolves, and they work towards fiscal sustainability so that we can optimize resource allocation, both for staff as well as some of our resources that are outsourced during the different project design phases. Capital plans also identify forecasted capital expenditures over the 6-year horizon, revenue sources and opportunities, as well as funding gaps. Next slide, please. Okay, there's a lot of information here, so I'll start by, again, this is talking about our programmatic and functional planning efforts that we go through when we plan a public works project. So the bright blue box on the left-hand side of your screen is all the different ways that a capital project can begin. We have seen projects that have started by a community request in Sammamish. We have projects that have started by staff observations identifying maintenance needs. They're often started by level of service, as well as new infrastructure as we're planning for growth. As we were talking about asset retirement and replacement, infrastructure improvements, there's a few things highlighted here that pertain to transportation projects only. We do look at corridor plans right now. We're in the middle of our corridor study for Sahali Way that will end up with a phased series of projects or separate discrete projects, depending on how that plan evolves. Our transit plan is a great example that, excuse me, is a plan that ends up recommending a series of projects that are added to our list. Our stormwater projects are often added through basin plans. The basin plans are a report card of the drainage basin's health, along with programs and strategies. They often recommend projects that are added to our master list. We just talked about our NPDES permit that often results in capital projects as well. And our retrofit strategy has a series of projects that were incorporated into our planning as well. So anything in that bright blue box is evaluated by staff. We score and prioritize the project. If the project is able to be completed by our Public Works operations team, we do add that to our operational programs. If it is not able to be completed by our operations team, the project goes into a long list, our 20-year planning list. That list is often, included in our Transportation Master Plan or TMP that we're currently working on. For stormwater projects, those projects are added to our Storm and Surface Water Master Plan, which the most recent master plan was completed in 2016, and we're planning to update that plan in 25 and 26. So both of those plans have strategies, programs, and projects. The strategies then are incorporated into our daily operations. Programs and projects are added to our 6-year Transportation Improvement Plan, or TIP, or a 6-year Stormwater Improvement Plan, or SWIP. Those two plans combined, along with our fleet, IT, and facilities and parks capital plans, to form the citywide capital improvement plan, which is a 6-year planning horizon. And then the 2-year look ahead is added to the 2-year budget cycle. In the case of transportation, the funding source for that is a transportation fund, or the 340 fund. For stormwater projects, that's the 438 fund, or the stormwater fund. Next slide, please. So I spent a lot of time talking about how our projects come to be. This is how we prioritize our projects, which is crucial. We'll always have a long list of projects, and we need to prioritize projects citywide so that we can go through them according to the criteria here, but also so that we can allocate funding to those projects. So our transportation projects and our stormwater projects are both evaluated, and then they are scored based on weighting criteria. Our transportation projects, you can see the scoring criteria to the left of your screen. They're currently, there's a maximum score of 420 points. There's a column in our TIP that prioritizes the projects and has a score next to each project. We are recommending in this upcoming TIP cycle and in the TMP to streamline that so it's on a 100-point scale, so that, or 100-point maximum score, so the scale would remain the same. Most of the community is quick, we are able to understand, and staff as well, in 80 points out of 100 versus 390 out of 420 points. So the weighting would stay the same. We are just converting that to a 100-point scoring system. Our stormwater projects, that criteria was identified in Resolution 2018-804, if anyone is interested in learning more about that. But those are the criteria listed below. They do add up to a maximum score of 100 points. Next slide, please. We'll spend just a few minutes talking about funding our capital projects. So Greg will go over different design phases for our capital projects, but when a project first arrives at our staff desk to evaluate and score, we also take a look at a conceptual design, and along with that, we prepare an estimate. It's a very high-level estimate with high contingencies, but those are what we start out when we very, very much begin the planning for that project cycle. So those high-level estimates are utilized for planning purposes. They go into our TIP and our SWIP and the citywide CIP. As the project moves along, those estimates are refined. Greg will go into that in a little bit more detail during design phase. Below is listed some funding sources for both types of projects, both our stormwater and transportation projects. Transportation fund, or the 340 fund, often includes our real estate excise tax, or REIT, traffic impact fees, or TIF, and allocations from the general fund should council decide that. The Stormwater Capital Fund, also known as 438, the primary revenue source for that fund are stormwater management fees, or SWIM fees. And then, of course, we love any and all grants. So local, state, and federal grants. And partnerships are another funding source, schools, other agencies, and private partnerships. As we progress as a city, we'll look at other revenue opportunities in the future as well. Next slide, please. So before I transition things over to Greg, and where we'll talk about a little bit more about the project planning process, design and construction, we did want to highlight one of our upcoming larger capital projects, the Lewis-Thompson Road Tightline project. So this particular project had a shorter planning horizon than a lot of our large projects, so I just wanted to note that. But in 2016, the Storm and Surface Water Master Plan identified the needs for the city to conduct basin plans. Again, those are the report card of the drainage basin's health. The Zacchaeus Basin Plan was completed in 2019, which identified the Lewis Thompson Road Tightline project as a top scoring project within that basin plan. That project was added to our Stormwater Improvement Plan, or SWIP, as well as our Transportation Improvement Plan, or TIP. Design began in 2022. The contract was awarded anticipating design at the end of 2021, and we are approaching final design. And that project is planning to go out to bid in the next few weeks. We anticipate a 15 to 18-month construction phase. After construction is completed in 2025, there's typically a warranty period for about a year before the city accepts the project as complete, and then the asset itself will be turned over to our maintenance crews to maintain. Depending on each asset, there's a different lifespan for different types of assets that'll be added to the city's asset management system. And we'll begin our maintenance and asset rehabilitation and replacement phases. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Greg.
So Audrey explained how we get from pre-concept through our planning process, through our TIPs and our SIPs. Those get approved, then projects get approved on our CIP and our project annual budget process. At this point, I'm going to explain how do we take that and actually design and build specific projects individually. First and foremost, we have individuals that are extremely talented in the Public Works Department with our project engineers and our project managers in our capital division and our storm divisions. But we also, along with very talented people, have very good processes. So we use project management processes where we initiate our projects, we plan our projects, we execute the projects, and we close them out. And we follow very prescribed industry standard project management methodologies, which I'll dive into a little bit more on the following slides. The first phase, we did complete the initiation of the project. This is completed after the project is approved at the city council level with the project budget, as Audrey mentioned, through all the pre-planning programmatic processes. So a project is defined by our project sponsor. We typically assign a project manager to that. That project manager creates a charter which outlines the overall goals of the project, and that is approved by our sponsors. And then team roles and responsibilities are created and defined in the initiation phase. We then plan our projects and create a project management plan. Majority of that is focused in on the big three, the triple constraints within project management: the scope, schedule, and the budget, or a financial plan. But along with those three triple constraints, there's a lot of supporting project plans that are just as key to the success or lack thereof of a project. So we have our risk plans, our procurement process plans, our quality plans, communications plans, staffing and resource plans, and there's many, many others. The project plan is, after it is completed by our project managers or project engineers, is again approved by our project sponsors, and a contingency level is identified and approved. Prior to moving into the execution phase of the project, part of that communications plan I discussed in the project management plan, we define project stakeholders. This is an example of a typical project stakeholder list that we have at Sammamish. You can see there's quite a lot of coordination that is required to have these projects be very successful, from internal city collaborations, from the Sammamish community, the city council, our public works department, and the other city departments. We have our local agencies and partners within the area, including the adjacent jurisdictions, the tribes, King County, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and others. And then our funding partners, the people that help us pay for this. Some of it is locally funded, some of it is part of other funding sources, including WSDOT, ARPA, which is American Recovery Plan Act, and others that you see here. In the execution phase, there's two distinct phases. First is the design phase. So typically, we complete a RFQ, request for qualifications, for a design services contract for either an architect or an engineer. In Public Works, we typically only deal with engineers. We have landscape architects and other architects for smaller buildings from time to time, but primarily our services require engineers. That contract, the design service contract, is then presented to the City Council for approval, and we begin design. We conduct our design in an industry standard that most jurisdictions that in this area follow, which is called the 30, 60, 90 comment resolution process, which are hold points within design. And you're probably looking at me like, Greg, why do you only design 30% of the project at a time? These are project levels, not project completion amounts. So we design the entirety of a project at each of these. So the entirety of the 30%, the entirety of the 60%, entirety of the 90%. So it's just that the project progressively gets more detailed as engineering progresses throughout. So we take a conceptual design and progress that to a 30% level. That is our basic project engineering and our early estimates. We then provide that level of design to our stakeholders. We receive feedback and comment from our stakeholders, and those comments are provided to our engineer. Our engineer goes and does comment resolution and then moves forward onto the 60% design. And that process is followed throughout. So I'm not going to repeat that discussion. I'm just going to explain what each of these stop gates are. So the 60% level is next. That is more detailed design, includes some early calculations and specification outlines for our project documents. And this is typically the design level where the scope, schedule, and budget assumptions that were in the preliminary budget are baselined and approved. After that, you complete the 90% design, which is the detailed design. It is pretty much the completion of the project design level. And at the 100% level, all you're doing is incorporating any final tweaks and any permit comments that have to be incorporated into the design documents prior to going out to the street to bidding. As Audrey mentioned, we are almost completed with our Lewis Thompson project at present, and really excited to have that out on the streets ready for bidding quite shortly. So that's the execution phase, execution of the project at the design phase. Next, I'll be discussing something that's warm to my heart. I'm a construction person by nature, and I love this portion of projects. I understand the importance of having a really good design project, but I really like building stuff. So after the design phase, we send the project out for public works bidding. We receive bids from contractors, and we present those to the City Council for contract award. And then we go into the construction management phase. And the construction management phase in public works contracts is very complicated and very process driven. We have to monitor our cost and complete schedule variance analysis. There's a lot of submittal responses throughout that process. For example, there's a lot of material submittals. Every single product that you see on a public works contract, not only do we have specifications to what they have to build, but the contractor has to provide us examples and material submittals to our construction management team and say, we're going to provide you concrete X. And we go back and confirm concrete X meets our specifications prior to them ordering the concrete. Similarly with our pipes, our lights, and anything else on our contracts. That's the material submittal process. We also receive work plans from our contractor. For examples of those are safety plans, emergency response plans, and stormwater pollution prevention plans. So our contractors are required to submit how they're going to build these projects. And we confirm as a team that they are meeting our permit requirements, our contract requirements, and any other jurisdictional requirements within the area. A lot of the bigger processes within construction management is also responses to requests for information. These are contractor-driven formal questions that our Sammamish team responds to and provides direction. An example of this is a contractor is digging in the field and they find a tank that they weren't expecting. They will send in to RFI and ask our construction management team, we found a tank where the sewer line is supposed to go. What do you want us to do with it? And we give them formal direction of how do they respond to that. We also perform change management. Our inspectors provide daily field quality inspections. And we also provide project status reports monthly that are completing forecasted cost, confirm our scheduled milestones are being met, and monitor our project contingencies. After the project is executed, we close it out. We end the project with a review and confirm our project is completed correctly. We do lessons learned on items that worked well and items that we can improve on. We close out the project's charging. We do final acceptance and project acceptance that comes back to the City Council for final approval. So in a standard project, the City Council at a minimum typically has four to five project action items and this is typically, well, not typically, this is the last one on a project, is project acceptance. So that is project management and how we conduct our projects, and through conceptual design, through design phase, through construction phase, and through closeout with our very talented project management team. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. And once the project is accepted as complete, that's when the city's assets that were just built transition from our engineering team to our maintenance team. And this begins the lifespan or the maintenance cycle for that particular asset, which can vary depending on type of asset, greatly. So, but these are typically the 4 stages of maintenance. So we begin with routine maintenance. This includes things like mowing our storm ponds, right-of-way vegetation, different things that you'll see in our operational budget, pothole repairs, replacing streetlights, some of the 500 streetlights that we maintain in the city, snow plowing, different things like that we plan for on a regular basis. We also shift into proactive maintenance. So those are things that we want to do, and this is often referred to as preventative maintenance. So it mitigates risk, it enhances safety, it also prolongs the life of the asset. So things like sidewalk grinding are a good example, upgrading our traffic signal cabinets, and street patching. So the photo on the top of that is actually our crews trying out a new technique on 216th Place called gap mastic. So it was able to prolong the life of that particular road. So that was considered preventative or proactive maintenance. As an asset ages, we also look at opportunities to rehabilitate that asset before it fails. So examples of this are a little bit larger in nature. They are often still funded through general fund, but that includes things like pavement overlays for our storm pipes. That includes things like lining the pipes. So really prolonging the life of that asset before we have to completely replace it. And of course, we are always aiming to replace our asset in an ideal world the day before it fails. As much as we would love to do that, we do have to plan, and that kind of completes our whole project circle when we are planning for that asset to be replaced. This is a small example on our slide here of a sidewalk panel that was replaced. Bigger project examples include our traffic signal cabinets, replacing the entire cabinet and upgrading that, replacing entire sections of storm pipe, and street reconstructions. So as our assets are damaged or age over time, they are set into a schedule for asset replacement. Next slide, please. So this is a lot of information tonight. We wanted to provide council and the community just a few resources if you want to find out more. Greg and I are happy to talk to anyone about any of the phases that we presented tonight. But some of our programmatic efforts, we often engage with the community through surveys, open houses. We often have tents and tables at our community events. All of these plans go to Planning Commission, most of them, and all of the plans go through City Council. So there's opportunity to provide public input at those meetings as well. And all of our plans have their own dedicated webpage as well. Our 6-year plans also have their own webpage. Oh, could you go back, please? Thank you. And those are also public processes. So we're just kicking off the meeting series for our 6-year transportation improvement plan and our stormwater improvement plan. All of those have public council meetings. We would love to have input from the community on our plans, and those also require public hearing. During design phase, Greg went through all the different opportunities for the public to engage during design phase of a project. At a minimum, every project goes through council at least 4 times during design phase. Construction phase is when typically the community is most engaged, as that does have its more day-to-day impacts. So every project that is a public works project has its own dedicated webpage. So that's your first stop for information. If you want to learn more about the project, its schedule, its budget, its progress, and like I said, every project has its own page. There's also contact information for the project manager on that page as well. We utilize Sammamish Cone Zone to advertise any delays or road closures, any potential traffic impacts for the community. So be sure to check that often year round, but it's full of more updates about April, May, all the way through September, our bigger construction season. If there are immediate noise or erosion or spill concerns, we always advocate the community to please use My Sammamish, our online request portal. And once an asset is in maintenance phase, again, when we do maintain assets, a lot of them are in the right of way. And so we do post any upcoming road closures or delays that that the community may see for traffic impacts on a Sammamish Cone Zone as well. And if you have any concerns about city infrastructure, we would love to hear about them. Again, submit a request in My Sammamish. And we do also have quite a few maintenance maps available on our website that talks about street sweeping routes and storm pond mowing and some of our planned maintenance work. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this is the first of many upcoming presentations. Just wanted to provide a schedule for council and the community. We plan to be back in May and June as we bring back the TIP and the SWIP. And then of course, in the fall, we'll have the budget and the citywide capital improvement plan. With that, that was the conclusion of our presentation this evening. Thank you for your time, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Deputy Mayor Howe.
Really helpful presentation. Thank you for spending the time and going through it with us. Could you go back to slide 16, please? That's so funny. I don't think it's funny. And the question that I wanted to see if I understand something correctly on this. So when you are awarding a contract out to the architect or engineer for the design services, like in the case of the Tightline project, I'm going to say that the consultant in this case is Osborne, but I'm not sure that's right. When you're working with somebody like that, are you in a position where you actually encourage recommendations coming from them, or are you giving them specific guidelines that you want them to engineer to?
You set them with the basic scope parameters up front of what the intent of the project is, that the original project is, that's been approved through the budget process. We also give them the design parameters of whatever permitting jurisdiction we have to have. So King County Stormwater Manual for storm design, any building permits requirements, there's various permitting requirements that they have to design towards. And then as design progresses, and that's what these stop gates are for, a project morphs and changes. Sometimes it stays exactly the same and the project is and sometimes it isn't. Perfect example is Lewis Thompson. Lewis Thompson started as a stormwater project. It became a stormwater/roadway project, and bike lanes got added to it and sidewalks got added to it as the design progressed, and the scope got modified, and the project got more defined. So just there's a change management process that I didn't dive into terribly, but that we have a very detailed change management process as well that documents how projects start and then how they change throughout that design process. I hope that answered your question?
It pretty much does. I mean, I understand change management processes and so forth. What I'm curious about is the relationship that the city staff has with consultants in general. Are you eliciting feedback from them, or is this a cookie cutter thing where they just know, oh, I do this thing? Because what I'm looking to do is to see, are we maximizing the opportunity to get the very best work out of our consultants?
We are. We have very talented engineers that work on our capital and our storm teams that make sure that that the consultant engineer, as the engineer of record, they have to put their engineering stamp on it, is maximizing the efforts and creating the best project for scope, schedule, budget, and the entirety of those triple constraints, but to maximize what we need as a city.
And my last question has to do with the duration of project, because I think, Audrey, you said something about how this was a fast timeline?
A little bit. So we had to pick, some examples to use in our graphic, of course. But Lewis Thompson Road, I would say probably, I don't want to say fast, but it was some projects can live on our master plan documents, right, for 10, 15 years, depending on how they score and how they're prioritized. So this was a top scoring project, stormwater project, right? It scored very well. It was the top project that was recommended to be implemented first from the ZAC use basin plan. When we put that into the entire stormwater capital plan, that was also one of our highest scoring projects. So it was implemented first. So from that perspective, that programmatic planning window was a little bit shorter, where had the project scored a little bit lower, it might have been on our 20-year list for a little bit longer until it was added to our 6-year list.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I have a question. So say a third party was replacing their gas lines on your road and tore up your whole road. When those repairs happen, how are you all involved? Like oversight, checking up on things, cost, all those things.
So that is Public Works and Community Development are involved with that. That requires a right-of-way permit. And so that's a different branch of Public Works in our capital division. But with that, we have a list of streets that we don't allow anyone to cut into without having to complete a full overlay of the street to preserve our assets. So it's typically, and if our streets are in really good condition or have recently had a lot of work in it, they have to restore that either way to existing condition or better, right? And so those are all permit constraints in that are included in the right-of-way permit that's issued by the city. So often when that type of work is done, depending on the season and extensiveness of the work, there'll be a series of temporary work that's done. So some temporary patching, and that might work for a month or two, depending on type of year. And then that's often patched with a little bit more permanent patch by asphalt patching, and then it actually goes through and it's probably would be a half street improvement to a full overlay, depending on the type of work that was done.
Great, thank you. That's super helpful. I mean, because I always see the spray paint, now there's like arrows, so it looks like just one half the street is getting done, but I don't really know what's happening, so that's super helpful. All right, council, any other questions? I think this presentation would have been so helpful like 2 years ago this is so interesting because there is so much to learn. So this is like, I learned a lot, and I mean, I've only been here for 2 years, but that was really helpful. So thank you both.
And,
Thank you, and we're
sorry, Mayor, if I may, the last two, actually all three presentations from tonight, we'll make sure are on our website as part of our transparency component to help educate the community about what we do and why we do it. And so these pieces will be out there for anyone to go in, and then the Public Works team so nicely put in links at the end of this presentation. So if you're in it, you can just jump to whatever you want to from that final page. So great job by the team, and that's looking forward to getting those out there for community to review.
Great. Thank you, Greg and Audrey.
Thank you.
All right, now we have public comment. It is empty in here, so let's see if we have any online.
Per the new reasonable accommodation, those who had pre-registered by 3 o'clock today, please raise your hand if you wish to give testimony.
Good evening, City Council. Paul Stickney here. Real good meeting information. Impressed with all of it this evening. I don't have much else to say. I was expecting, and maybe that's not the right word, I was hoping to see some of the numbers coming for the capital improvement plans for city and for IT, but I suppose that'll be coming. But I agree with Mayor Clark. Excellent presentation, very thorough, real good information. Was also quite interesting on the stormwater changes coming. So I just wanted to say, good meeting, real good information, easy to follow, well presented, and I'm happy it'll be on the website. Have a good evening.
Thank you. All right, I think that was it. Scott, do you have anything?
A couple of very brief items, Mayor. Reminder for all of council, next week, it's group portrait time. Please remember to arrive early and wear whatever you'd like to wear for the updated group portraits. I believe the time is starting from 6 to 6:20, so please get here a couple minutes early for so that our fine photographers can get everything set up and put you in the right spots. The other piece is just a continual reminder as we get closer. Earth Day is coming up, our Earth Day celebration at Beaver Lake Lodge on Saturday and now I've just had a complete, Saturday the 20th, thank you, at Beaver Lake Lodge, and looking forward to seeing everyone out there. And that's all I have for tonight, Mayor, thank you.
I just had one clarification for the city clerk. Since we did the board and commission interviews in January, were you okay with us asking the same questions to the applicants for next week? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And sorry, Mayor, that'd be the other reminder is next week that we are doing boards and commission interviews. And I think as part of the process this time, since we're just spot filling open seats, I think the goal is to also adopt the resolutions at the same time after you all take your votes. So we'll be doing that all at once next week.
All right, did anyone else have anything? I think I saw a pic, yeah.
I'll raise my hand. I have a public issues committee meeting tomorrow evening, and I've sent out the agenda, and I can follow up after the meeting.
Deputy Mayor Howe?
I'll let, you're gonna forget, well, we have a Eastside Fire Rescue meeting. That's Councilmember Stewart and myself. Later this week, I have a Eastside Transportation Partnership meeting with Sid and with Kent, and then we've also got, I've got emergency management on Wednesday, so lots of meetings.
All right, not seeing anything else. Have a good night, everyone.